Hello, I am the Script Doctor, and welcome to the channel. With only 2 episodes left, there's no time remaining for another side quest for our hero. The big story needs to be addressed. There's no getting parts back from the Jawas or hiding on a backwater planet, no walks down memory lane during a bounty hunting job, and no space jailbreak to accomplish. Do you know what's missing from that brief recount of the series? A threat to our hero. By the end of Chapter 3, the Mandalorian has every surviving bounty hunter after him, and in the 3 episodes that follow, only encounters 2 attempts on the kid's life, one in the village and another in space. Neither of them have any real impact on his choices in subsequent episodes. When we start Chapter 7, the Mandalorian is just cruising through space. No destination, no objective, just going for a drive somewhere, until he gets a call from Greef Karga. He states that the Empire has overrun his town, and he's willing to forget all transgressions if the Mandalorian comes back and helps him kill their leader. It's a nice setup, but a little disappointing because the motivation is coming from a secondary character instead of our main character. It's not like the hero's journey, where the main character longs for adventure, and when the opportunity arrives they refuse the call. Here, the Mandalorian doesn't have any specific want at all. He has no goal, no plan. He's just on the run. He doesn't think to investigate the reason the Imperials want the child. He doesn't think to find his clan and launch a counterattack. He just runs away with zero direction. When you set up a character like this, then you are very limited in how they find their way into a plot. You would need to give the character another inciting incident, which is essentially restarting your story. In this case, the story has been brought back to life through Greef Karga. This is going to be his episode because he's taking charge, he's got a goal, and is using the Mandalorian to facilitate that goal. Yet, this isn't the Greef Karga show. It's the Mandalorian, and this should be his plan that he's presenting to Greef, not the other way around. It's not exactly great to have a passive hero. As we've seen in the majority of the episodes, a passive hero leads to passive stories. When characters are passive, we as an audience don't learn as much about them in the same passing of time as we would for a more active hero. If we do end up hearing about our hero, it would be through dialogue only instead of a combination with action. Actions always speak louder than words. An active hero has a personal goal. They make choices unique to them in order to achieve that goal. Those unique choices tell us about the character. We got a taste of this in the first chapter, but so far at this point, any active measure taken by the Mandalorian doesn't appear to have strong connecting tissue to his situation, mostly because aside from the fact that he and the child are on the run, we don't really know much about his situation, and being on the run is not enough when it comes to story. We need to see the pressure of being on the run at all times. We need to see how being on the run escalates and makes things more difficult. We need to see that the galaxy is closing in on him unless he comes up with a plan. But so far in 4 of the 7 chapters released, there doesn't appear to be any pressure or urgency regarding the Mandalorian story. Things appear to be stable, not exactly great, but not dire. And if they're not one or the other, then we're not getting drama or action or, in actuality, entertainment. Remember in Empire when Han, Leia, and Chewie are fleeing from the Star Destroyers? How we got to see a thrilling chase, a rest in a cave only for it to be a giant space worm? Remember how after they escaped the worm, the Empire was right on top of them again? Remember how their hyperdrive wasn't working and it's getting hopeless? Do you see a pattern of escalation? Do you remember what happened next? Han decides to turn around and charge the Star Destroyer. Do you remember the feeling that gave you? The number of questions and potential that was rushing through your head as the Falcon got closer and closer to the Star Destroyer. Everyone is wondering what's going on, even the crew of the Star Destroyer. That's an example of active storytelling. It is also character-driven, and the result develops character as well. Han latches the Falcon on the back of a Star Destroyer, showing ingenuity. We get some development that he knows how Imperial ships operate and uses that to help with their escape. We see through those entire sequences his knowledge being put to task and his determination to make it out alive with his friends by his side. His frustrations when things don't work as planned, and his fear when he sees trouble before his friends realize the situation. All these bits I've described happen in a handful of minutes in a feature film, and it's more character development, action, drama, urgency, goals, and entertainment than we've seen in the last 3 chapters of The Mandalorian. But Script Doctor, you say, what about Chapter 6 with the jailbreak? It was cool in parts, but what did it give us? A little backstory that the Mandalorian was a mercenary and a few good action scenes, but nothing that really challenges the hero. Nothing difficult for them to overcome. He may have been thrown in a cell, but he got out of it a minute later, so that moment isn't really a big deal. That was also a chapter with zero consequences. Ask yourself this question. Say everyone but him were killed by the ship's droids. He returns to his ship and flies away before the Republic forces arrive. What happens to the Mandalorian and the child after that? How will they suffer because the hero didn't achieve this side quest goal? What is at stake? And that's the problem. We don't know because those things are never established in the chapter or the series thus far. But here, finally, after 3 chapters of very little character or central plot progression, we get a goal, an opportunity for our hero to no longer be on the run. Sad that it isn't our hero's idea, but it is something active, a clear plan to change his situation. The Mandalorian decides to recruit the characters he's interacted with in the series to join him on his quest. He gets Cara, and while he tells her of his plan, the child messes with the ship's helm and Cara suggests a babysitter. This takes us back to Quill, where it is daytime, and we get an added bonus of a reprogrammed IG-11, all structured around exposition that stops the story cold. That's right, Quill tells us all about IG-11 but doesn't ask why the Mandalorian is here. That comes at around the 10-minute mark. It's only after night has come on the planet that the Mandalorian tells Quill why he's here. He didn't even tell them while they were in Quill's hut. Quill is tending to the blurgs, and that's where the Mandalorian discusses the situation. This part of the scene should have occurred before the IG-11 backstory so that when he does show up after his speech, you can inject some conflict with the Mandalorian, Quill, and the droid right away. It would be a better flow and show us how the Mandalorian is remaining active and direct to the point. He's on a mission and not interested in chatting about the good old days over some tea. While they fly to Navarro, the Mandalorian and Cara have an arm wrestle. Here we get another taste of the child's force powers as he force chokes Cara. This is a strange magic to them, and only Quill has heard of such abilities before. Now, many of you are probably thinking how none of these characters know about the Force or Jedi. Well, there are plenty of logical reasons for that. First, the Jedi have been extinct for nearly 30 years by this point of the story. In the original trilogy, it is only characters that we would consider old that talk of the Force, those being Obi-Wan, Jan Dodonna, Akbar, and Yoda. You would think that society would still be told about them, but are you taking into account the fact that Star Wars is a galactic society, meaning there are thousands of populated worlds with their own history and culture, trillions of people? While the Jedi may have been the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic, they weren't everywhere. Luke didn't even know about them while growing up on Tatooine. He was told by Obi-Wan. Ask yourself this. If you were to go out on the street right now and ask as many random people as you could about Godfrey de Saint-Omer, do you think they would know who you were asking about? Do you even know this historical figure? If you have to Google it, that proves my point. He was an early member of the Knights Templar. Oh, you think that was too long ago? Okay, let's do something 30 years ago. Ask about General Norman Schwarzkopf. If you have to Google him as well, again, my point is proven. Only a small amount of the population are going to know or remember historical people and events. As societies become larger and more dense, priorities change and people focus more on personal needs rather than historical ones. Remember, in The Empire Strikes Back, Luke Skywalker is known as a commander in the Rebellion, not a Jedi. Anytime he uses force powers in Return of the Jedi, aside from Jabba's palace and with the Ewoks, it is only around Han, Chewie, and Leia. The rest of the landing party weren't captured by the Ewoks and about to be roasted, just the core group. Any fights with lightsabers happened between Vader and Luke, with one witness being the Emperor, so there's no other party to pass on that story. As far as the rebellion is concerned, Lando and Wedge destroyed the second Death Star with the Emperor on board. Is Luke the type of character that would brag about defeating the Emperor and Vader by himself aboard the Death Star? I don't think so. I think that his experience facing the Emperor and saving his father remained between Han, Chewie, Lando, and Leia. That part of his story isn't important to the rest of the rebellion. And that's the point. We as an audience know all the details of what happened, but that doesn't mean that the entire rebellion or galaxy within Star Wars knows it. They would at best know about Luke destroying the first Death Star as he, Wedge, Han, and a Y-Wing survived that attack and saved the rebellion. It was a rather public event. But Luke's story aboard the second Death Star, that was intimate. It was not broadcast to the entire galaxy, and only after that single event does the Jedi return, and it's only one person. The rebellion has thousands of people, and based on the mission briefing earlier in the film, everyone in the space battle was under the impression that Luke was with Han and Leia taking out the shield generator. that story may not have been updated to every single person in the Alliance. It is downright foolish to believe that everyone in the Rebel Alliance or the Star Wars galaxy would have the same knowledge of events as the audience does. If it did, that would make every character in the galaxy, known or unknown, live their lives revolving around Han, Luke, and Leia, and that would be boring. So toss aside any issues you have about characters not knowing about Jedi or the Force, because even Luke Skywalker didn't know about those things at the start of his adventure, so why not accept that from other characters in their own stories? Speaking of story, our hero and his team rendezvous with Karga and his team. They trade pleasantries, and while Karga is being a tad more overdramatic than we're used to, we transition to a contrived campsite scene where they get attacked by these pterodactyl creatures that snatch two of the blurgs and lacerate Karga. This is why it gets contrived, because the child has a reason to heal Karga. In the morning as they approach the city, Karga shoots the remaining members of his team and reveals the real plan. He was going to betray the Mandalorian and hand over the kid, but after the child healed him from a fatal injury, he can't bear to continue the betrayal. It's quite a turn. Mechanically, it works. Karga's life was threatened and the child saved it. He is grateful and his mind has changed. We see at this point that he has a heart. However, it doesn't feel as honest with the character as it should. It seems like we're seeing the writer's hand sway the characters. What is lacking is subtle telegraphing of Karga's honor and heart. We don't get that in any of his previous moments in the show. The closest we get is Karga's remarks to when he first sees the child, but the performance comes across as almost a mockery instead of a character being taken by the innocence of this child. We don't get a sense of doubt, or a sense of Karga understanding the Mandalorian for taking the child back. It might not be bad writing in this moment, but maybe bad direction. It feels like in this scene, the instant Karga sees the child, he should hesitate, then try to continue to play his role that he doesn't care. He should be talking to himself and the Mandalorian here. Some parts low, some parts louder, but we don't get any sense of a personal conflict for Karga. Instead, here it is all loud, on the nose, and comes across as patronizing. But had this scene been paced a little differently, with a proper performance by Carl Weathers, I think it would make his turn to the Mandalorian side a bit more believable. I'm surprised by this sequence being so out of place, as this episode was directed by Deborah Chow, who did quite a great job with the third episode on pacing and performance. But then again, nobody is perfect. With Karga's entourage dead and him on the Mandalorian side, a new plan is formed. Take the kid back to the ship and go in themselves to kill the Imperial and end this conflict. Good plan, but why enter the town at the same time as Quill and the child head back to the ship? Why not wait a few hours to ensure enough of a head start for Quill and the child to be safe? We've not been given a scheduled time that they have to meet with the Imperial to overturn the child in the first place. Given the context of the situation, these ex-Empire troops have the town under garrison, which means ground troops and vehicles, which means not only are they outnumbered, but they're outgunned and can be outrun. A group of characters, especially those with mercenary and military background, should be able to formulate a better strategy than what they end up doing. The Mandalorian should have told Quill to return to the ship and send the droid in as backup in the event things go south. Or heck, fly the ship in and use its weapons to decimate the troops. A side note, it's also ridiculous that the Mandalorian states how there is a lockdown function on his ship that makes it a fortress. Where the hell was that function in Chapter 2? Our heroes enter the village that is swarming with troopers, all designed to build up the stakes by establishing how outnumbered they are as they head into the Dragon's Den. Werner Herzog greets our heroes and monologues about how superior the Empire was compared to the New Republic, then abruptly segues to wanting to see the baby. Before tensions could grow, a stormtrooper interrupts the action with a call from Herzog's superior. This is our introduction to Moff Gideon, who implies that the child isn't in the bar and proceeds to execute him and his troops. I will say, it is rather convenient that all of the Imperials die but our heroes do not. We didn't even get a blaster bolt skimming off an arm or leg of our heroes to cause even a minor injury. Plot armor is still better than Beskar. The other missed opportunity is that a stormtrooper didn't survive the attack. You could have had two outcomes if you added that idea. The first being that he gets on the holo and claims he secured the heroes, or the second being that he takes off his helmet and starts firing back at the Death Troopers. Maybe have Karga offer him a job. Introduce a new character to add to the bunch. It would be a little jarring, but could logically work and would reinforce the idea that stormtroopers now are more about the money than the belief in the Empire. I still think it would be amazing to see a stormtrooper character turn against the Imperials and become a hero. Too bad we didn't get that story in the recent films, but perhaps it could be reused in future episodes of The Mandalorian. Now that our heroes are surrounded, the Mandalorian thinks it's a good idea to check in on Quill. However, when he learns that he's not yet at the ship, the Mandalorian volunteers the information that Quill has the child instead of it being with them. 2 scout troopers intercept the transmission and take initiative into retrieving the child. Had the Mandalorian not mentioned the kid over an open channel, Quill would have more time to get back. But the Mandalorian made a stupid decision. He had no reason to remind Quill that he has the child. This is another contrivance. Repeat information to a party that they already know so another party can overhear it and exploit that information for themselves. It is not good writing. There was already a setup with Gideon doubting the child was with the Mandalorian. If Quill was approaching the ship only to find a squad of stormtroopers waiting for him, then we would have a larger dramatic effect. Quill would be literally running into a trap, and if he tried to turn around and ended up seeing another squad approaching, then we would really get that dire situation we need. Instead, we get a good ticking clock, but it is introduced in such a contrived manner, all the suspense has vanished. In many cases, when watching a show that takes little to no risks, you can figure out what is going to happen next, but what you as a writer need to do is change it up by altering how that prediction is going to happen. Everyone knows watching a cop movie that if a character remarks how it's his last day until retirement, he's probably going to die. Unless you as the writer decide not to kill that character, then it's unavoidable. So you have to come up with a unique way to show how that cop is going to kick the can and when that will happen. It is the job of the writer to make that prediction entertaining enough so as the prediction doesn't elicit an eye roll or bore the audience. It's about the journey. If the writer can make it entertaining and worth the time, then the prediction ceases to be boring and instead becomes cathartic. Here, because of the Mandalorian's foolish remark, we end up losing a character that is quite endearing. We get something of sadness when we see the scout troopers scoop up the child and a slow reveal of Quill and his blurg dead. What's interesting is that Quill had enough time to lift his goggles on his forehead so that we could see his eyes closed as we pan up. Aside from the result being a solid cliffhanger for this episode, the execution still felt hollow, which seems to be a continuing flaw with this series. A lot of good ideas and solid starts with characters that end up being gutted or discarded so the episode's story can fit within a constrained 30 minutes. It was a rather nice change to watch an episode of The Mandalorian that wasn't filler, that wasn't wasting time until the next set piece, but actually gave us some character development and an arc for Karga. This was his episode, and Carl Weathers owned it. Sure, there was a little bit of misplay with his interaction with the child earlier, but I quite enjoyed the rest. He sold the embellished dialogue well, and seeing him turn from an antagonist to an ally, while expected, was fairly satisfying. There is a line about how Beskar can become quite beautiful when forged by ancestral artisans. The same critique can be applied to writers. The Mandalorian has the material, but it doesn't quite have an artisan that can shape it to be something worthy of its element. They've got some skill and a lot of talent. We'll have to wait and see how well they refined it for Chapter 8. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have anything to add to this episode, please leave a comment below. Thank you for watching, and never forget, it all starts with the script.